Hello everyone, Old Guy Gaming here with a very different kind of video for my channel, as I am going to describe why I am returning to a game that I have loved for decades, and that is Warhammer 40,000. So at the beginning, for those of you who are subscribers and fans of this channel, you will know that the backbone of this channel is MTG Arena and Magic the Gathering Arena content, and I want to quell your fears immediately by saying none of that is going to change. I will continue to produce MTG Arena videos 2 to 3 times a week, every week, guaranteed. That is the bread and butter the channel was built on. It's what the subscribers have asked for. So that's not going to go anywhere. So if that is your area of concern, quell your fears. Everything will be fine. I'm still going to do that. However, that having been said, I will kind of go into a little bit of detail. Something has been released this past week that I have to discuss, and that is Warhammer 40,000 9th edition. This is a game that goes back in my history, like I said, decades, to be perfectly honest with you, that I've played this game for a really long time, and I'm going to be going back to it with the new edition. So there is a bit of a story behind if I'm going back. That means that I left the game for a moment. So if you're interested in any way, shape, or form, stick around to kind of get an idea of what Warhammer 40k is, for those who do not know, why I left the game so many years ago, and why I've decided to come back. So I'm going to give you some pretty pictures to look at while we're going through discussing this, because just having my face on camera for 20 minutes just seems kind of silly and boring. So I want to give you an idea of what Warhammer 40k looks like and why I'm returning to it. So Warhammer 40k is a tabletop miniatures game. So think of it like, I don't know, it's like, imagine a board game but bigger. One of my favorite one of my favorite analogies to anyone who asks me anything about Warhammer 40k is I always describe it as chess with guns. And that legitimately is what it is. So each player lovingly crafts and builds their own models and puts them on the table and rolls dice and does battle with these monstrosities from the far future of the 41st millennium. It's a fantastic game. For starters, without a doubt, and keeping in mind, as I say this, I genuinely believe that the Warhammer 40k universe is, without a doubt, the #1 science fiction IP I have ever read. It is the coolest story, based in our own universe, in our own world, just 38,000 years into the future, where space aliens, also known as Xenos, which you'll hear me fly that title around, and humans who have fallen to the dark powers of chaos, and aliens from outside of the galaxy who want nothing more to just eat our universe. The history and the lore of this game alone is enough to want to keep someone interested in the game. And that's one of the fantastic things about the Warhammer 40k hobby, is the story behind it. There are plenty of folks that I know that do not play the game, do not collect or build the miniatures. They simply read the stories. And the Black Library produces tons of fantastic books centered around different eras of the 41st millennium, or the 30th millennium if you get into the Horus Heresy era of the book. So without a doubt, fantastic. That's one of the things that I have kept up with over the years, is the stories, because the story, if nothing else, has kept me involved in the game, kept me involved in the story, and kept me wanting to be interested in the game. The second part, of course, is the actual miniatures themselves. It is a tabletop miniatures game, meaning that you build kits, you put them together, hopefully you paint them, and you put them on the table to play a game with them. It's absolutely, but again, I know plenty of folks who are more interested in the building of models and painting of models, not necessarily so much the actual playing of the game. They just really like the models. They really think the models are cool and enjoy just building and painting those, which is fantastic. It gets you to scratch that itch of creativity, get some paintbrushes out and lick some brushes and put some models together. That part alone from the hobby could be fun, but you couple that with the story that comes behind the models, and then, oh, by the way, there's this fantastic game that you can go to a game store, play with your friends, go to tournaments, go to grand tournaments, fly out to places like Southern California or Vegas or the London Open, and go to these great grand tournaments in the competitive market. So Warhammer 40k can be whatever you want it to be. You can be a more narrative player and you want to play the stories out of the books and you want to recreate battles that you have read about in the books. You can do that under narrative play, or in 9th edition's called Crusade play, or as you can see on the table on the screen as you're looking at here, you can take these to an event and you can take these to a tournament and play on these lovingly crafted tables in competitive play and try to test your mettle against who can be the best player. That's one of the things I think is most, for me, most enjoyable about 40K is the competitive level of play, because it's always, I always feel that it's, how can I outthink my opponent? And anything that scratches that intellectual itch for me is fantastic. I played a lot of competitive chess in my past. I'm a nerd, so that should not surprise most people. And this is just kind of like that next level. So, okay, you've played competitive chess. Well, now have you played 40K? What if I've got my Space Marines with bolters going up against your orcs? Can you make it? Can you hold this objective? Or am I going to blow you off the board and clear you off this planet? It's a ton of fun. So as I talk lovingly about the game, I had to have left at some point. There had to have been something that happened to the game that stopped me from playing the game as actively as I did. So a little bit of backstory for me. I got into Warhammer 40K in my way back in those crazy years of my latter high school years, the late 1990s. It was a crazy and wacky time. Everybody wore starter sports apparel. The whole grunge thing was going in around that time. Nirvana was cool. And Warhammer 40K kind of entered my life. So at that time, of course, you know, when you're a teenager, you don't have any responsibilities at all. The only important things in the world are what you're doing with your friends. And for me, it was Dungeons and Dragons first. We played every Saturday. You had Magic the Gathering. We were going to tournaments on the weekends if we could. And then this came along, and I kind of took a cursory interest in it in my latter part of my high school years before I went off to college. A friend of mine, a good close friend of mine, stuck around with the game and continued to, he was more of the, I want to build the models, I want to paint the models, like that was the part of the game that he genuinely enjoyed more than anything else. And it could have just died there. I bought some things. I think I got myself up to about 1,000-point army. You know, we'd play in a basement kind of thing, and that's all it ever was. It'd be just like breaking out a game of Risk. Similar concept, like I've got my army, you've got your army, I'm going to try to beat your army. You know, that kind of interaction with the game. But when my buddy stuck around with it and started building these cool models, and he started getting really good. I mean, really good at painting some of these models. I will never forget the day that he came over to show me the latest model that he had painted, and I looked at it and went, oh, wow, that's so cool. I mean, that game just looks so cool. I mean, because there's a game behind all of that. Not only do you get the cool factor of building these loving models and these cool-looking, vicious models, but then you get to put them on a table and play a game with them. And then I started flipping through Games Workshop. Games Workshop is the Games Workshop is the company that produces Warhammer 40,000, among other games. You flip through their website, and then I found what I fell in love with the most were two armies. But for me, the first one was the Necrons. Necrons are these undead metallic skeletons with a touch of Egyptian theme to them. Ancient evil that is just slowly awakening and returning to the galaxy kind of thing. And I was hooked. I was hooked right then and there. One of my favorite things to run in D&D campaigns were undead campaigns. So undead in space with a little bit of an Egyptian theme to it. You got me. And I started building and painting Necron models, went out and got the codex and started playing on the table. Again, starting off small, but then we found out that, you know, there was a local game store that sort of semi ran events there and sort of semi did things, and I started going. And I got to meet a whole bunch of cool new people. That's part of the other, in my opinion, the fourth factor of why Warhammer 40K is such a great game, is the community is 90% of it, 95, fantastic people who just want to do the same thing that you want to do. They've lovingly built it and painted their armies, and they want to get them on the table and roll some dice. Here it turned out, though, this was, for those who actually know 40K, this was in the 4th edition of the game, and anybody that played back then knows that Necrons were brokenly good. They were so good. I didn't know that. It's not what I bought the army for. I had no concept of what competitive 40k looked like in any way, shape, or form, but it turned out the army that I picked to play turned out to be one of the best in the game at the time. So then I got a taste of what it was like to play the game competitively, and then you're winning games and you're winning stuff and you go to tournaments and you're getting prize support and you're getting more models that you can add to this, and you can start getting more armies and more models, and then you get kind of really wrapped up into it and just have a ton of fun. I mean, that was going to 40k tournaments, going from 4th edition into 5th edition was a really big deal at that age for me, because, well, I was young and just recently married, no kids at the time, not yet. So like, you had that to be able to, like, honey, I'm going to go to, I'm going to drive 3 hours away to go to a 40k tournament and come back with free models. I mean, it seems like you'd waste more money in gas driving there and coming back, but darn it, you won those. You won those on the table. So that was always a ton of fun. And then we moved into the 5th edition of the game, which in my personal opinion was the pinnacle of 40k for me. Now, I'm not going to stand on a hill and die and say that 5th edition 40k was the best. There were my Necrons right there. I'm not going to go and say that the 5th edition of the game was the best edition game. It wasn't. There were some problems with the game. Wound allocation being one of them. You always get these weird, stupid things where you've got this big block of 12 models, but this one's got, a stick bomb, and that one's got a hammer, and that one's got a grenade, and they're all equipped differently, so I'm just going to bounce all the wounds around. So you actually have to do 17 wounds, 18 if you count the war boss on a bike, before you actually kill one model. I mean, I'm not going to say that 5th edition didn't have its problems. It certainly did. Grey Knights in 5th edition were insanely overpowered. Space Wolves 2, probably. Leaf Blower Guard. That was those time frames where when the Valkyrie first came out, and then the Imperial Guard armies at the time were like, okay, turn 1, 3/4 of your army has been blown off the board. Your turn. Yeah, it did exist. It was there. But it was so much fun to be able to go to some of these events. It was so challenging to go out and attack other people's armies and try to pick apart their strategies and see if you could actually pull out games. It was a ton of fun. The height, I think, the biggest event we ended up going out to, my friends and I ended up driving out to and spending a couple of nights out in Philadelphia for the Philadelphia Open. It was a big GT. I think there was over 120 people there. It was a 2-day event. That was the height. That was a lot of big name competitive 40k players who are big names now, who are just getting their starts in their careers then, were at the event. I didn't do very well. It doesn't matter. We had a ton of fun. But 6th edition introduced something that didn't feel right to me, to the game. Up until that point in the game for me, people were dedicated to the armies that they played. So I have a friend, for example, I don't want to give his name out, but has a Dark Angels tattoo because he is a Dark Angels player through and through. Live with there's more Necrons. Will live and die by playing Dark Angels. And I've got another friend of mine, who was the main painter, has a mark of Khorne actually tattooed onto his body because he's so really into Khorne Chaos Space Marines and Karn the Betrayer. But 6th edition introduced something that was different. So back in 5th edition, you had force organization charts, and you only ever ran one codex. And that was it. 2 HQ, 2 troops. Well, in 5th edition actually did something better. From 4th edition, there was just 2 troops because everyone just run the minimum. But 5th edition, you had to run troops because troops were required because only troops could score on objectives. Something more modern 40k players are going to be getting used to with 9th edition, especially with objective secured and how heavily the game is leaning towards objectives now, at least in the good old chapter approved. But the introduction of allies. So allies was a part of the game that was always there, but it was always on the peripheral. Like certain armies could pull in bits and pieces from another army. Like, for example, I believe the Imperial Guard could take a small smidgen of Inquisition. The Sisters of Battle, something similar. But it wasn't commonplace. If you were a Blood Angels player, you played Blood Angels. You didn't bring anything else but Blood Angels. And you only ever ran that one force organization chart because that's all there ever was. 2 HQ, 6 troops, 3, 3, and 3 from your elites, heavies, and fast attacks. That was it. That's all you could build. But 6th edition changed that. 6th edition introduced formations, which are akin to what you 8th edition players might know as detachments now, with some added bonuses. So like you would take, if you took X, Y, and Z units, you would get extra special rules to go with those X, Y, and Z units, and they would be overpowered as heck because Games Workshop wasn't really caring. They did the old cover their eyes, competitive 40k doesn't exist. They did that for so long, where they didn't really care much about rules balancing or points balancing or game balance. It was just whatever they were. The motto for Games Workshop back in those days was, well, we're a model company, not a game company. They've changed that attitude. They've seen the error in their ways, which is the reason why 8th edition, in my opinion, is so successful as it is rolling into 9th. But that allies thing was something that just didn't settle well with me. So like right around the early onset of 6th edition, you saw things like Taldar, for example, where you would have Tau and Eldar on the same table, which, again, coming from the competitive guy's perspective, fluff-wise just didn't make sense. I had a friend of mine that ran Orcs and Necrons. I had other friends of mine that were running Tau and Orcs, and yet the best of both worlds. You got this really cool close combat army with a really powerful shooting army right behind it. Armies were built in those days, and they still are fundamentally to the point. Every army has its strengths, and then every army has its weaknesses. And if you have the ability to fill those weaknesses with bits and pieces from another army that's better at it than you, then all of a sudden your army doesn't have any weaknesses. Now, back in those days, you didn't get things like soup, like you ended up with in 7th and 8th edition, where everyone's sharing all these special character rules. Like at least in those days, they at least kept it sane, where an Eldar Psyker couldn't cast it on a Tau unit to give them guide or anything like that. But eventually it went there. Eventually what started happening is you started doing this intermixing and this blending of all these armies and all these army special rules, and then you got what 8th edition was known for very early on in its incarnation of soup armies. And it heavily favored the Imperials. I mean, and I'm not trying to be anti-Imperial. I do own a Space Marine army. I do have a Sisters of Battle army that I am purchasing from a friend. So, like, it's not that I'm anti-Imperial, but if you're a Xenos player, like my beloved Tyranids, they can't ally with anybody. Like, oh, sure, they did Gene Stealer cults, and oh, boy, I can get guys in bikes against super soldiers and Titans. I'm like, oh, okay. My point is the game didn't feel right to me once you started doing this interblending of codices. Now, I recognize that might not be very popular, especially for those of you that came into the game more recently within 8th edition. That's something that you're used to. It's what you quote-unquote grew up in the game with. Like, you're used to the idea, I'm going to take a detachment of guard, I'm going to take the, what do they call it? The honorable 32, where I take, so I can open up more slots for command points for this, but I'm going to be running a Titan, I'm going to be running Imperial Titans, and then maybe I'll take a small, detachment of Space Marines just to kind of fill in all these gaps for objective holdings and things like that. Like, that's something that you can do. You could quite literally run 3 detachments from 3 separate codices because you're all Imperial and everything works. But if you're a Xenos player, the only thing that you have are the different, like, for example, dynasties or the different hive fleets or whatever, the different craft worlds for Eldar. I mean, you pick your poison for if you're a Xenos player, but they're all still basically the same thing. Like, you don't get the ability to say, I need a gap filler here. I'm weak on close combat, so I'm going to pull from this Imperial army, and I'm weak on long range, so I'm going to peel from that Imperial army there, and just making them brokenly overpowered. I'm not even going to get into Primaris. That's a completely separate video coming up on why Primaris Marines actually just blow my mind. But that just didn't feel right to me. That didn't feel like 40k to me. And again, maybe it's the OG in OGG is old guy. I recognize that I am old and I'm kind of set in my ways. That's what drove me out of the game, at least from playing it on the tabletop anyway, was the fact that it just didn't feel like 40k. I love the lore. I think Games Workshop by far has done an amazing job maintaining and protecting their IP with one of the greatest science fiction universes ever conceived. And I love the models. Like, their models, bar none, are some of the top in the world as far as the level of intricacy, and they keep getting better and better. When you look at older kits like the old Orc Boys kit, which is like 20 some years old at this point, and you look at some of these, even the starter kit, quote unquote, like the Primaris Marines that come out, like the level of detail on these plastic miniatures it's phenomenal. It really is. So everything there, they were just beautiful models, fantastic story. It's just the game just didn't speak to me in any way, shape, or form, because it was a shadow of its former self with the way that the game was being built and played. So having said all of that, why am I going back? Why did I excitedly, the day before, thankfully my game store was kind enough, run out and buy the rule book and chapter approve, and why have I dusted off my Necrons and found kits that I never put together, and I've started priming and painting, and I want to be prepared for whenever at the time of this recording, current health crisis that is around the world preventing people from going to local game stores. Why am I getting prepared for the day that that's not a thing and I can actually go into a game store and play? Why? Because I genuinely feel, from all the things that I'm reading, and I have read and genuinely believe, having read all of it, 9th edition is going to change all of that. 9th edition is now going to, it's not eliminated allies, and it's not eliminated the ability to go into other armies and pick and choose the best units. It didn't. You still can do that. You still can take detachments from other codices and kind of mix and match, but it's at a cost, and at a pretty hefty cost. With command points, the command point system, the way that it is now, everyone's starting off with the same amount of point, and then those detachments costing you command points, that's costing you tactical advantage in a game. So if you're going to do that, if you're going to pull a unit from another codex, it better be worth the 3 command points or the 6 command points or however many command points that you're spending to get those units into your army, because you're really putting yourself at a tactical disadvantage by doing so. I genuinely feel that Games Workshop is working their way into getting back to a more traditional game on the table, where it's one codex. You're playing from one codex, and that's all you're really pulling from, because it's more advantageous for you. You get maximum command points for doing so, which means we're going to see more single codices armies on the tables. We're going to see less soup, where everyone's driving to get all of these special rules to wrap around each other. We're going to start seeing less of that. We're going to see more advantage to those individuals that are taking armies from a single codex, and that's it. And that's what the game looks like to me. That is what it means to me. That's what 40K is really kind of all about. It's when I sit down across the table, I know I'm playing Blood Angels. I know what I'm getting into. I don't need to know every rule that 3 different codices are running and how they all interact. I need to know one. It's a little bit, it makes more sense to me. Even thematically, it makes more sense to me. And then what it does is it starts taking away the hamstringing that they've done. Oddly enough, very good cue for my screensaver here that's going through all the photos. It takes away that one of the hamstrings that they've done for Xenos armies, where if you couldn't ally with another codex and you couldn't bring in those other units and fill those gaps, you were kind of screwed. I still feel, unfortunately, that my beloved Tyranids are going to be in need of a new codex, as I don't think that the game's really designed for Horde armies quite yet, but I could be wrong. I still have arguments that I think that Horde armies will be the best at holding objectives, and the whole game's about holding objectives. And sure, you might beat me in the end with all those big blast weapons, and I can't do as much damage in close combat, but the first 3 rounds of the game, I racked up so many points on primaries and secondaries that I still win. I'm going to test that on the tabletop. We'll find out. I have theories, but theories are one thing, actual gameplay is another. So that's what it is. So again, keeping my cursory eye on the game and what's been going on convinced me. And having picked up these books and read them and understood them convinced me this is going to be a very different game. The fact that the game has gone to completely different scoring, I think for me, coming from the way that 6th edition was scored, 4th, 5th, and 6th edition were scored, where there's objectives on the table and whoever's the last person standing in at the end of the turn, that's who wins, to I could score objectives turn 1, 2, and 3, and you could literally blow me off the board, and I still win. That's a very different game. It's a very different game. The fact that, like, we're going to be scoring games of 40K in they're going to look like basketball, like college basketball scores, 78 to 44, 96 to 22. Like that, to the fact that we're going to start seeing scores like that, like that's how we're going to be scoring 40K games is just super exciting to me, because it allows for those armies to have very different strategies. It does to me look very early on that center board control is going to be key. Having good, solid, objective secured units holding those objectives is what's going to win you the game. And it's those early rounds that are rarely going to do it. The latter rounds will help, and getting blown off the board is not going to be a nice, fun feeling. But if you still won the game, what difference does it make? So that's it. So where is this going for content for the channel? Because I'm obviously putting this up on my channel. There's a reason why I'm putting it on this channel. The reason is that starting the following week of the release of this video, I'm going to be releasing a weekly 40K video. It's not going to take the place of my MTG Arena stuff. That's still going to happen Monday, Wednesday, Fridays every week. But every Saturday or Sunday, depending on which day it kind of works out, my objective is to put 40K content out there. So this is going to include everything from hobbying, lore, the rules, list construction, all of that fun stuff. Why I don't like Primaris Marines, because they don't make sense in the fluff. Like there's a good 30-minute rant that I could go on right for that one. But since we are, again, at the time of this recording, under the current health crisis that we are, there is an alternative to playing physically on the tabletop, and that is the quote-unquote game, tabletop simulator. There's a lot of people, I've been following a lot of Tactical Tortoises tournaments that they're putting on tabletop simulator, and that's kind of where I want to go. I want to learn the game in 9th edition, as that's kind of the only outlet. But I might be streaming some of that stuff. I might record some of the games. Like some of my friends and I who are going to be the ones who I'm all dragging, kicking, and screaming back to 40K. We're going to be playing in on Tabletop Simulator at first, so we'll probably show some of those games, some highlights in there, some battle reports. Once we get back to the table and we're actually on the table, I'll be doing live battle reports, maybe even do some live streaming. Let me know in the comments down below. If you came here looking strictly for 40K content, I've got an open window. Like, I genuinely have all kinds of ideas for where I want to go. I probably have like the first 5 or 6 videos already planned out in my head, but after that, it's kind of like whatever strikes my fancy on that week. If there's content that you want to see in the 40K universe, let me know. Like, I'm going to be doing how to play, like for the new players, because I genuinely, coming from where I am in the game, or where I was in the game at the early onset of 6th edition coming into 9th edition, there's a lot that I missed out on, and there's a lot of stuff that I genuinely don't know. So it's almost like I'm getting back into the game from the beginning. So I'm going to treat it that way, and I'll be writing content that way. And I know that how popular 8th edition was, and it's pulling more and more people. Like, the Games Workshop sold out of the Indominus box sets, and they had to do a rerun and print to order just to make sure that everyone who wanted one got one. The game's getting big. It's getting really, really big. And it's probably the biggest that I've ever seen it, which is one of the other reasons why I'm so interested in returning. So if you're interested and you have content that you'd like to see, let me know in the comments down below, and subscribe while you're there. It'd be fantastic for the channel. So that's it. I think that's all I've got to cover. Let me know your thoughts, comments down below. Like, subscribe, all that YouTuber crap. And until next time, guys, we shall see you on the battlefield. This video was brought to you in no small part by our patrons. If you would like to help out the channel, go to www.patreon.com/oldguygamingmtga, and thank you for your support.